I was sitting by the window that afternoon, the autumn sun sliding through the curtains, warming the armrest of the chair where I had spent countless mornings with my husband before he passed. The tea beside me had already gone cold when the phone rang. At my age, unexpected calls always come with a flutter in the chest. It was my daughter, my only child, the girl I had raised through scraped knees, school recitals, and heartbreaks, the one I thought I knew better than myself. Her voice came through the line with a sharpness I'd never heard before. "Mom," she said, clipped and hurried, "we're moving tomorrow. Your beach house is already sold." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat dried, my heart thumped, and the silence stretched too long. She thought she was delivering news, like a banker announcing a foreclosure. She didn't even soften her tone. I finally managed. "The house? Sold?" "Yes, Mom," she continued. "It's done. We needed the money. Edward found a buyer and we signed the papers yesterday. The cash will cover everything we need for the move. You don't have to worry about a thing." Her words echoed in my ears. We needed the money. We, not her and me, not family, her and Edward, my son-in-law with his slick suits and hollow promises. He never looked me in the eye unless he wanted something. That house. It wasn't just wood and brick. It was where my husband and I had poured our sweat and love for decades. The smell of fresh bread from summers when Angela brought her friends over, the laughter of Christmas mornings. Robert's old fishing rod still leaned against the porch railing. It was the place where our memories lived. And just like that, she was telling me it was gone. But instead of collapsing under the weight of her betrayal, I found myself smiling in a way that startled even me. "Angela," I said, steady now, "you missed one thing." There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her frown. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice suddenly less certain. I leaned back, letting the quiet build. The autumn light glowed against the wallpaper, and I could feel Robert's presence beside me, as if he were chuckling under his breath. "I'll explain soon," I told her. And then, before she could press me further, I laughed. Not the bitter laugh of someone defeated, but the laugh of someone holding a secret. A laugh that made her pause, made her realize that maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated the mother she thought was powerless. Her hesitation cracked through the phone line. "Mom, what's so funny?" I only said, "The house you think you sold was never yours to sell." That was when she hung up. Just like that. No explanation, no protest, just a sharp click that left me staring at my reflection in the dark screen of the phone. For a long time, I sat there, my tea cold, my pulse steady. It struck me that my daughter believed she had finally taken control, that by selling the beach house, she had stripped me of the last piece of Robert, of us, of everything. But what she didn't know was that the story had already been written differently years ago, because Robert had left me something no one, certainly not Angela, and especially not Edward, could touch. The truth was, I had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Angela's greed to reveal itself in full. And now, as the sun dipped lower and the room grew shadowed, I knew one thing with perfect clarity. The game had finally begun. Tomorrow, when she came knocking for my surrender, she would find something else entirely. She would find me. After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that presses against your skin like heavy fog. It wasn't just what Angela had said, it was the way she had said it. No warmth, no hesitation, no trace of the little girl who used to slip her hand into mine when she was afraid of thunderstorms. Only steel, sharp and cold. I let my eyes wander to the mantel above the fireplace. There, framed in modest oak, was a photo of Robert and me at the beach house the summer Angela turned 10. Robert's arm was around my shoulders, his hair already turning silver from years of hard work, but his smile, oh, that smile, was as bright as the sun itself. Angela stood between us, her cheeks flushed from playing in the surf, her grin missing a front tooth. That beach house wasn't just property, it was our family stitched into wood, laughter trapped in the walls, and tears soaked into the floorboards. We built it when we had nothing but grit, determination, and each other. Robert worked double shifts at the bus depot. I sewed clothes for neighbors and baked pies for church fundraisers to stretch every dollar. When we finally got the keys, it felt like proof that all our sacrifices had been worth it. And now my own daughter had reduced it to nothing more than a transaction. We needed the money, she had said, as if years of birthdays and Christmas mornings could be measured in cash. I thought of Robert's old truck, too, the one Angela sold without a second thought. That faded blue Ford had been his pride, his Sunday ritual. I could still see him outside in the driveway, sponge in one hand, radio playing in the background, whistling while he polished the chrome until it gleamed. After his heart gave out 6 months ago, I'd sit in that truck sometimes just to smell him in the worn leather, to hold the steering wheel where his hands had rested. To Angela, it was an old vehicle with a price tag. To me, it was Robert's ghost, his memory on 4 wheels. I pressed my hands together tightly the way I used to when I prayed. But this wasn't prayer. It was resolve hardening inside me. Angela had always been ambitious, but I had never imagined ambition would curdle into betrayal. As a girl, she wanted everything bigger, brighter, better, the biggest slice of cake, the shiniest shoes, the newest toys. I thought she'd grow out of it, that she'd learn the quiet joy of patience, of enough. But somewhere along the line, that hunger sharpened, and Edward fed it. He came into her life smooth-talking and full of grand plans. From the start, I distrusted him. There was something in his eyes, a calculation, a restlessness, that reminded me of men I'd seen ruin their families chasing quick fortunes. Angela, though, looked at him like he hung the moon. "He's going to make us rich, Mom," she used to say, her voice giddy. Well, he had made someone rich, but not us, and certainly not her. As the shadows deepened in the living room, I realized what cut deepest wasn't the loss of a house or a truck. It was the way my daughter had spoken to me, as if I were nothing but a hurdle in her path, an old woman to be managed and swept aside. 45 years I had spent raising her, guiding her, giving her every ounce of love and sacrifice I could muster. And in return, she had hung up the phone as if I were a stranger. I should have cried. Perhaps a softer woman would have. But grief had burned itself out in me months ago when Robert passed. What rose in its place was something colder, steadier. Angela thought she had stripped me bare. She thought she had left me with nothing. But that girl had forgotten who raised her. I had lived through lean years when Robert and I had barely enough coins to buy bread. I had lived through wars, through sickness, through loss that would flatten most people. I had endured. And now, if my own daughter thought she could break me, then she was about to learn a lesson money couldn't buy. My gaze drifted back to that photograph on the mantel. Robert's eyes seemed to twinkle at me, even from behind the glass. He had always said I underestimated myself, that I didn't realize how strong I truly was. "Well, Robert," I whispered, my voice low but steady, "looks like it's time to show her." I rose from my chair, my knees stiff but my back straight. The game had changed the moment Angela made that call. She believed the past belonged to her, that she could sell it off like an unwanted heirloom. But the past has a way of biting back, and soon she'd see that the mother she had dismissed still had teeth. Tomorrow would come quickly. And when it did, Angela would discover that her betrayal wasn't the ending of my story. It was only the beginning. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the groan of the old house, the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Every sound felt louder, sharper, as if the walls themselves knew a storm was coming. Angela thought she had beaten me, but she had no idea what she was up against. The house she claimed to have sold wasn't hers to sell. It never had been. I remembered the day Robert and I signed the papers for it. nearly 40 years ago now. The lawyer, a serious man with thick glasses and a steady voice, had insisted on one particular clause. "It will remain in your name, Mrs. Brooks," he had said, tapping the page with his pen. "Not your husband's, not your daughter's, yours. That way no one can ever dispute ownership." At the time, I thought it unnecessary. Why would I need such protection? But Robert, ever cautious, had smiled and squeezed my hand. "Humor me," he whispered, and so I had signed, my name flowing in careful loops across the page. That decision, made so casually on a summer afternoon decades ago, now stood like a fortress between me and my daughter's betrayal. Angela had always assumed that because Robert adored her, he had left everything equally to her when he passed. She thought the beach house was family property. She thought she had the right to sell it. But she was wrong. Robert had known better. He had insisted the deed be locked in my name and mine alone. So when she said she had sold it, I knew instantly what she had done. She had forged something. Or more likely, Edward had. He had probably shoved papers under her nose, told her it was legal, told her it was smart. And Angela, blinded by her hunger for quick money, had believed him. The irony was sharp enough to make me laugh again in the dark. They had sold nothing, at least nothing they had the right to sell. By morning, my plan was already forming. I pulled the old tin box from the dresser drawer, the one where I kept our most important papers. The deed lay there, yellowed at the edges but still crisp where it mattered, my name shining clearly in ink. I traced the letters with my finger, remembering the way Robert had smiled that day, proud of me, proud of us. A knock startled me. It was Aurora, my neighbor of nearly 4 decades. She stood on the porch with a basket of fresh rolls, her sharp eyes scanning my face the way only lifelong friends can. "Antonia," she said, her voice cautious, "I heard something strange at the bakery this morning. Is it true? Did Angela sell the beach house?" I took the basket, inhaled the warm, yeasty smell, and let a slow smile curve across my lips. "She thinks she did." Aurora's brow furrowed. "Thinks." "Yes," I said simply, "but she missed one thing." I didn't explain more. Not yet. Aurora was kind, but word traveled fast in our little town. And if Angela believed her scheme had succeeded, then I wanted her to keep believing it, for now. Let her and Edward play their little game, their fantasy of control. The longer they thought they had won, the sweeter the truth would taste when it finally broke over them. Later that afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with the deed spread before me. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who had handled Robert's affairs after his death. He had been gentle then, patient with my grief, but firm about the importance of safeguarding my documents. "Mrs. Brooks," he said warmly when he answered, "how are you holding up?" "I'm holding up just fine," I replied, "but I need to ask you something important." Within the hour, I was in his office downtown, the deed folded neatly in my purse. He listened carefully as I explained Angela's call, his face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "if they signed anything, it was fraudulent. The house is yours, beyond question. No one, not even your daughter, can sell it without your consent. This is clear cut." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I had known the truth, of course, but hearing it confirmed in that solemn office filled me with a calm satisfaction. "Then let them believe their story for now," I said. "I want to see where this takes them." Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "You're planning something." "Not planning," I corrected softly. "Just waiting. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones people teach themselves." When I left his office, the city felt brighter, sharper. The trees swayed gold in the afternoon light, and I walked with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. Angela thought she had taken everything from me, but the truth was she had only handed me the rope by which she'd hang her own illusions. By evening, I returned home and placed the deed back in the tin box. I smoothed my hand over the lid, whispering, Thank you, Robert. You always thought ahead. And as I settled into bed, I knew this was only the first secret Angela would stumble into. There were others, deeper, darker, more surprising, that even I had not yet uncovered. And when the time was right, those secrets would rise like a tide, sweeping away every lie Angela thought she had built. The morning after my visit to Mr. Peterson's office, I wandered into my bedroom, meaning only to change the sheets. But grief, like a restless cat, has a way of curling up in unexpected corners. I opened Robert's dresser, his side of the old oak set we had bought just after our wedding, and there it was, tucked neatly beneath a stack of his handkerchiefs, a manila envelope, plain, unmarked, yet somehow pulsing with significance. I froze. My mind pulled back to the weeks before Robert's death, the quiet way he had pressed my hand across the breakfast table. "If anything ever happens to me," he had said, his voice firm despite the shadow in his eyes, "look in the drawer, but not right away, only when you feel ready." In the storm of the funeral and the endless condolences, I had forgotten his words, or perhaps, if I'm honest, I had chosen to forget. Opening that drawer meant facing the truth that he had been preparing for his own absence. Now, though, as Angela's betrayal echoed in my chest, I felt ready. Ready in a way I hadn't been before. I carried the envelope to the bed, sat down and let my fingers rest on the seal. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation. Whatever Robert had left me, it was time I knew. The paper split with a soft tear, and I pulled out a stack of documents, their edges crisp, their weight heavier than any letter should be. The first was a handwritten note, his familiar scrawl curling across the page. "My dearest Antonia, if you're reading this, it means I've gone ahead of you. Forgive me for not telling you sooner, but I needed to shield you from worries while I was alive. Over the years, I set things aside, not just the beach house, but more. You once told me I was too cautious. Maybe so. But I wanted to be sure that whatever happened, you would never be left with nothing." I blinked rapidly as tears blurred the words. My Robert, always planning, always thinking beyond the moment. I turned to the next page. Property deeds. Not one, but several. A small apartment building on the east side of the city, a motel by the coast, a tidy downtown condo, all tucked under the name of a company I'd never heard of before, yet there, in bold print, listed me as the sole owner. Behind the deeds were bank statements, rows of numbers so large they seemed unreal. Investments in companies I'd only vaguely heard mentioned on the evening news. Quietly, steadily, my husband had built a fortune, while I thought we were scraping by on his bus driver's salary and my sewing work. I pressed the stack to my chest, a sob escaping before I could stop it. Not from greed, not from excitement, but from love. He had carried this burden alone to spare me, and even in death he was still protecting me. And Angela, she had no idea. The absurdity made me laugh through my tears. She thought she had stolen my last crumb, when in truth I was sitting on a feast she couldn't even imagine. But tucked at the back of the envelope was something stranger. A smaller slip of paper, folded into quarters. I opened it and read the single line written in Robert's hand. "Trust no one too quickly. Even love can disguise hunger." I stared at the sentence until the words burned. Robert had known. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to suspect Angela's weakness, enough to fear Edward's ambition. I slipped the papers back into the envelope and hid it beneath my own belongings. Not because I feared theft, Angela believed I had nothing left, but because the truth was a weapon, and weapons must be used wisely. That afternoon I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the maple tree swaying in the yard. I thought about Angela's smug tone on the phone, about the way she had dismissed me with a few clipped sentences. She believed she had taken control, but what she had really done was ignite a fire in me I didn't know I still carried. For years, I had lived quietly, content to play the role of mother, wife, neighbor. But Robert had left me with more than property and money. He had left me with power, And now, as betrayal pressed against love, I understood what that power meant. Angela would return one day, expecting me to beg, expecting me to crumble. Instead, she would find a mother she didn't recognize, one who knew the truth, who held every card, and who had no intention of surrendering. I folded Robert's letter once more and tucked it into my blouse pocket, close to my heart. His voice echoed in my mind, "Even love can disguise hunger." Yes. And sometimes hunger must be starved before it can learn what true nourishment is. As dusk fell, I whispered to the shadows, "Don't worry, Robert, I'll handle it. She won't see it coming." The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that comes not from sorrow, but from the weight of decision. Robert's envelope had cracked open a door I hadn't known was there, and now I had to step through it. I made myself strong coffee, stronger than usual, and stared at the stack of papers I'd laid out on the kitchen table. They looked innocent enough, just ink and paper, but they carried the power to change everything. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Peterson again. His secretary put me through at once, her voice crisp and polite, as though she already knew I carried something important. "Mrs. Brooks," Mr. Peterson said when he came on the line, "you sound urgent." "I found something," I told him. "Something Robert left me. I think it's time you had a look." Within 2 hours, I was back in his office, the manila envelope tucked in my bag like contraband. The building was quiet that morning, sunlight spilling through the tall windows, dust motes dancing like tiny conspirators. Mr. Peterson greeted me warmly, but when I spread the documents across his desk, his professional composure faltered. "Good heavens," he muttered, adjusting his glasses. This is far more than I imagined." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Tell me exactly what it means." He turned each page with care, lips moving as he read, brows rising higher and higher. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me with something like awe. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "your husband was a remarkable man. These deeds, these certificates, they represent a portfolio of assets worth several $1,000,000, conservatively, and all of it is legally in your name. The company he created shields the ownership from prying eyes. To the outside world, it looks like an investment firm, but in truth, you are the sole beneficiary." I sat back, the words washing over me. Several $1,000,000. It felt absurd, almost laughable. Me, Antonia Brooks, who still clipped coupons for groceries, who still patched socks rather than buy new ones. "Robert," I whispered under my breath, "what on earth did you do?" Mr. Peterson smiled faintly. He was cautious and very clever. Every investment was quiet, deliberate, and long-term. Apartment buildings, small businesses, modest stocks that grew steadily. He must have started decades ago. I thought of all the evenings Robert had sat with the newspaper, pen in hand, circling numbers in the financial section. I had teased him about it, called it his puzzle page. He had only winked and said, "Just keeping my mind sharp." All along, he had been weaving a safety net big enough to catch us both. "Mr. Peterson," I said firmly, "Angela must not know about this, not yet, not until the time is right." His expression tightened. "She has no legal claim, of course, but secrecy will be complicated. The more people involved, the harder it is to keep such matters hidden." "I don't intend to involve anyone," I replied, "except you. I need your help to secure everything, to make sure every loose thread is tied, every fraudulent sale she attempted is undone, and every property Robert left is firmly in my control." He studied me for a long moment as though seeing me in a new light. "You know," he said slowly, "most widows who discover such wealth are overwhelmed. They make rash choices, spend unwisely, or fall prey to greedy relatives. But you sound like a strategist." I met his gaze without flinching. I've lived long enough to know that money is both a shield and a sword. Used poorly, it destroys. Used wisely, it protects. Right now, I intend to use it for both." He nodded. "Then we'll proceed discreetly. First, we'll nullify the so-called sale of the beach house. That's straightforward. Second, we'll review the other assets, ensure titles and registrations are airtight. I'll need a few weeks, but when I'm finished, you'll have full control." "Good," I said, standing, "because my daughter is about to learn a lesson she'll never forget." As I left his office, a quiet thrill coursed through me. For months I had drifted like a shadow through my own life, hollowed by Robert's absence. But now I felt awake again. Not because of the money itself, but because it gave me the power to shape what came next. Angela thought she had stripped me of everything. She thought I was weak, dependent, a woman to be pushed aside. But soon she would discover that the foundation she believed she had stolen from me was never hers to touch. She had underestimated me, and if Robert were watching from above, I knew he would be smiling. For weeks I heard nothing from Angela. Not a word, not a postcard, not even the shallow, "How are you, Mom?" that used to pass for love. She had vanished into the wind with Edward, clutching the illusion of wealth she thought she had wrested from me. At first I wondered if she would write, if some sliver of conscience might prick her. But the phone stayed silent and the mailbox filled only with bills and grocery flyers. If Angela remembered I existed, it was only as the old woman she believed she had defeated. But small towns are not kind to secrets. News travels faster than trains. One morning, Aurora appeared on my porch, her arms crossed, her mouth tight with curiosity. "Antonia," she said, "did you know your daughter is in Europe? Paris, I think. Someone saw her friend's photographs online. Angela smiling like a movie star in front of the Eiffel Tower." I forced a smile. "Is that so?" Aurora leaned closer, her voice lowering. "But the pictures, they don't look right. Edward looks flushed, sloppy, as if the champagne cost more than he could afford. And Angela, well, she's smiling, but her eyes don't match the smile. You know what I mean." I did. I always knew. That night, alone in my kitchen, I brewed tea and stared at the steam curling upward like restless spirits. Angela thought she had escaped, that Europe would erase the past. But I knew Edward better than she did. Men like him carried ruin in their pockets, spreading it wherever they went. It wasn't long before the cracks began to show. The first sign came in the form of a frantic voicemail. I nearly dropped the phone when I heard her voice, shaky and raw. "Mom," she whispered as though hiding from someone, "things aren't going as planned. Edward says the deal is delayed, that we need more cash. The hotel bills are piling up. Don't worry, we'll fix it. We always do. Just trust me." She hung up before I could answer. I sat in the quiet house, her words echoing. "We always do." "No, Angela, you never did. It was always Robert and me who fixed things, who carried you when you stumbled. Now, with Robert gone and me refusing to be your safety net, you were discovering what it meant to walk without a hand to steady you. Weeks turned into months. Another call came, more desperate this time. Mom, Edward's investment partners, well, they weren't real partners, just men in suits with slick promises. We lost money, a lot of money. But it's temporary. Edward says he has another opportunity in Madrid. Just a little more time, and we'll be fine." Her voice cracked on the word fine. I didn't return the call. Instead, I sat with Robert's envelope on my lap, rereading his words. "Trust no one too quickly. Even love can disguise hunger." He had been right about Edward, and I feared he had been right about Angela too. By the time the third call came, her confidence had shattered completely. "Mom," she sobbed, "Edward is gone. He left with another woman. I don't even know her name. He took what little money we had left and disappeared. I'm stranded here with bills I can't pay and debts I don't understand. I don't know what to do. Please, I need you." For a long while after the line went dead, I sat unmoving, the phone still pressed to my ear. The sound of her sobs lingered like ghosts in the air. And here was the sharpest truth. My heart, traitorous as always, ached for her. She was my daughter, flesh of my flesh, even if she had treated me like a burden. I wanted to gather her in my arms, to soothe her the way I had when she scraped her knee as a child. But love without wisdom is just weakness. And Robert had taught me better. I placed the phone down and whispered into the silence, "You made your choice, Angela. Now you must live with it." Yet even as I spoke, I knew the story was far from over. Angela would come home. She would return broken, humbled, stripped of the arrogance that had once made her blind. And when she did, she would expect to find me ruined too. Instead, she would find a mother reborn. I sipped the last of my tea, bitter and cooling. Across the room, the envelope still lay on the table, its secrets safe. Soon, very soon, it would be time to use them. Because the game had shifted. Angela was no longer the conqueror. She was the one on her knees, and I was ready to decide whether she would rise again or stay there. The day Angela returned was gray and wet, the kind of rain that soaks not only the streets but the bones of a town. I watched it fall from the porch, the drops splattering against the railing Robert had painted so many summers ago. I had a feeling she would come back like this, on a day when the world itself seemed tired. I didn't have to wait long. A taxi pulled up at the curb, its windshield wipers squeaking. Angela stepped out, a single battered suitcase in her hand. She wore the same expensive coat I remembered from before her trip, but it hung differently now, wrinkled, sagging, as though mocking her. Her hair clung damply to her cheeks, and her eyes, once bright with entitlement, were rimmed red from nights of crying. For a moment, I thought she would stand tall, chin lifted the way she always did when she wanted to command the room. Instead, she faltered, her shoulders hunched against more than the rain. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked like thin ice. "Angela," I replied evenly, stepping aside. "Come in before you drown out there." She dragged the suitcase across the threshold, leaving muddy streaks on the floor. For once, I didn't mind the mess. The real stain was not on the tiles, but in the space between us. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had once sold me out with a single phone call. I poured her coffee, watching her hands shake as she wrapped them around the cup. "Mom, I don't know where to begin," she said finally, staring into the dark liquid. "Try the beginning," I answered softly. And so she did. The words tumbled out. Edward's lies, the failed investments, the hotel bills, the woman in Paris, the final abandonment. She spoke quickly at first, as though afraid I'd cut her off, then slower, weighed down by the shame of each detail. I listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, my face calm. Inside, though, my thoughts burned. Not because I was surprised, Robert's warning had prepared me for this, but because hearing it from her lips made it real. When she finished, she looked at me with the wide, pleading eyes of a child who has broken something. Priceless. "I have nothing, Mom. No money, no home, no husband. I don't even have friends left. I've made such a mess of everything. I don't know where else to go." Her words were raw, desperate. The Angela who had once spoken to me with cold authority was gone. In her place sat a woman stripped of arrogance, her pride in tatters. Part of me wanted to reach across the table to stroke her hair as I used to when she was small. But another part, older, wiser, harder, held me still. "You have somewhere to go," I said carefully. "You're here now." Her eyes filled with tears. "Do you mean, can I stay?" "Of course," I said. Then, after a pause, "But this isn't the same house you left. You'll find things have changed." She blinked, uncertain. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of my words linger. That night, after she had gone to bed in her childhood room, I sat alone in the kitchen. Her suitcase lay half open in the hallway, clothes spilling out like regrets. I thought of Robert, of the envelope, of the wealth Angela couldn't even imagine. And I thought of the temptation, how easy it would be to tell her everything, to rescue her with a single confession. But rescue is not always love. Sometimes love is letting someone feel the cold so they learn to cherish warmth. Angela was home again, yes, but she was not returning to the life she had abandoned. She was stepping into a lesson, one that I, her mother, would orchestrate carefully, patiently, until she understood what no money, no man, no Paris dream could teach her. I whispered into the quiet house as if Robert were still sitting across from me. "She's back, my love. Now the real work begins." Angela settled into her old room the way a stranger might settle into a borrowed bed, hesitant, restless, ashamed. The posters from her teenage years still clung to the faded wallpaper, curling at the edges. I had left them up after she moved out, a quiet shrine to the girl she once was. Now they looked almost mocking, bright faces frozen in joy, while the woman unpacking beneath them seemed hollowed out by life. She moved slowly, folding clothes into drawers that still smelled faintly of cedar. I stood in the doorway, watching. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. "Thank you for letting me stay," she whispered, her voice so small I almost didn't recognize it. "This is your home," I replied, though we both knew it was more complicated than that. In the days that followed, I let Angela believe the version of reality she had written for me, that I was poor, abandoned, stripped of everything. She spoke with pity in her voice as though she were doing me a kindness by sharing my roof. "Don't worry, Mom," she said one evening as we washed dishes side by side. "I'll get a job soon. We'll manage together somehow." "We'll manage together." If only she knew. The words almost made me laugh. She thought we were two broken women clinging to each other. In truth, I was standing on solid ground, holding her above the quicksand of her own mistakes. But I didn't correct her. Not yet. Instead, I let her wake early to scour job listings, let her walk the streets with resumes in hand, her once manicured nails now chipped and raw. I let her taste the sting of rejection when shopkeepers shook their heads, unwilling to hire someone with debts trailing behind her like shadows. She grew thinner, paler. Her once expensive clothes looked out of place in the small-town stores where she begged for work. And still, I said nothing of the fortune hidden in my dresser. At night, I heard her crying softly through the thin walls. Once I stood outside her door, my hand hovering near the knob. I wanted to go in, to hold her as I had when she was small and nightmares chased her from sleep. But I stopped myself. Nightmares can be cruel teachers, but they leave lessons behind. I did, however, leave small kindnesses where she wouldn't notice. A hot cup of tea on the table after she came back from another failed interview. An extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of her bed. Soup simmering on the stove when her face looked especially drawn. She never asked where these comforts came from. She assumed, as always, that I managed somehow. One afternoon, Aurora came to visit. She eyed Angela, who sat slumped at the table, hair tied back, face tired. When Angela excused herself to rest, Aurora leaned across to me. "Antonia," she murmured, "your daughter looks different, humbled almost. Do you think she's learned anything?" "Not yet," I said, stirring my tea, "but she's learning. Slowly." Aurora studied me, suspicion flickering in her eyes. She had always been too perceptive for my liking. "You're hiding something," she said. "Perhaps," I admitted, "but sometimes the best lessons require silence." She pursed her lips but didn't press further. The days turned into weeks, and Angela began to shift. She cleaned her room without being asked. She helped with laundry, something she had never done willingly before. She even volunteered to cook, though the first meal was a burned stew that left the kitchen smelling of smoke for hours. "I'll do better next time," she said sheepishly, and I simply nodded. One evening, she returned from town, her shoulders squared differently. "I found something," she said. "It's not much. A part-time cleaning job at an office. Night shifts. But it's work. I looked at her, at the faint spark of determination that had replaced the old arrogance. "That's good, Angela," I said. "Very good." She seemed almost proud. For the first time in years, she had earned something on her own, without leaning on me or Robert's legacy. As she busied herself making tea, I turned my gaze to the window, where the dusk was settling like a heavy blanket over the neighborhood. Robert's voice echoed in my memory. "Trust no one too quickly. Even love can disguise hunger." Yes, I thought, but sometimes hunger is the only thing that teaches us the value of bread. And so I let her believe, let her struggle, let her grow, all while the deeds and bank statements slept quietly in my dresser drawer, waiting for the moment when truth would not only shock her, but change her. Angela's first night at the cleaning job left her bone weary. I heard the creak of the front door just after midnight, followed by the shuffle of tired feet across the hall. She didn't know I was awake, but I lay in bed listening to the sigh she let out when she sank into her mattress, the kind of sigh that belongs to someone who has worked until their body has nothing left to give. In the mornings, she tried to cover her fatigue, painting on a brave face as she buttered toast. But the shadows beneath her eyes betrayed her, dark crescents that grew deeper each day. "It's honest work," she said when I asked how she was managing. "Not glamorous, but it feels different, like I'm actually doing something." I nodded, hiding my thoughts. For years she had mocked ordinary labor, sneered at people who swept floors or washed windows. Now she was among them, scrubbing offices after hours, learning firsthand what dignity hides in humble tasks. But work alone could not erase the debts Edward had left in her name. The bills arrived like clockwork, white envelopes stacked on the kitchen table, their demands written in bold print. Angela would open them slowly, her face paling with each figure. "Mom," she murmured one evening, her voice trembling, "they're saying I owe over 100,000. Loans I didn't even know Edward took. Some of them have my signature on the papers." I looked at her steadily. "Did you sign them?" She shook her head. "I must have signed something he slipped in front of me. Or maybe he forged them. I don't know." Her hands shook as she pressed them to her temples. "I don't have that kind of money. I don't even know where to start." I reached over and slid the stack of envelopes back toward her. "Then you start one step at a time. That's all any of us can do." She bit her lip, tears welling, but she nodded. It was the first time she didn't demand that I solve her problem, the first time she accepted that the burden was hers to carry. Over the next weeks, I watched her adapt. She learned to budget, stretching her small paychecks over groceries and bus fare. She traded designer shoes for worn sneakers, expensive makeup for soap and water. Pride no longer draped her like a cloak. Instead, humility settled across her shoulders, and though it made her look smaller, it also made her seem strangely stronger. One evening, she returned from her shift with blisters on her hands, the mop handle having rubbed her skin raw. She winced as she poured hot water over them, but when I offered to bandage them, she shook her head. "No, Mom, I need to feel this. I need to remember what it costs to live carelessly." Her words startled me. There it was, the beginning of something real. A lesson sinking deeper than regret, shaping itself into wisdom. Still, the weight of her debts pressed hard. Collection calls came at odd hours, voices sharp and threatening. Angela would flinch at every ring of the phone, her shoulders tensing until I answered instead. "Wrong number," I would tell her afterward, letting the lie sit between us. She never questioned it, too ashamed to probe further. Aurora visited often, bringing soup or gossip. She watched Angela carefully, her sharp eyes noting the changes. "She's different," Aurora said one afternoon as we sat on the porch. "Not so proud, almost grateful." I sipped my tea, keeping my thoughts hidden. Life has a way of sanding down the rough edges. "And you?" Aurora asked. "What do you feel seeing her like this?" I looked across the yard where Angela was kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds with bare hands. "I feel patient," I said. But the truth was more complicated. My heart ached each time I saw her cry in secret, each time I heard her stifle a sob into her pillow. Love wanted to rescue her, but wisdom told me rescue would only erase the lesson. Robert's words returned to me often. Even love can disguise hunger. Angela had fed her hunger for too long. Hunger for wealth, for status, for easy answers. Now she was tasting something different. Hunger of the belly, hunger of the spirit. And maybe, just maybe, that was the medicine she needed. One night, she came home later than usual, her eyes red. She dropped her bag on the floor and collapsed into a chair. "Mom," she whispered, "I got offered another shift. More money, but it means working nights and weekends. I don't know if I can do it." "Then you decide," I said calmly. "What matters more to you, rest or survival?" She stared at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Survival." I watched her shoulders square as she said it. The daughter who once thought the world owed her everything was beginning to understand that the world owed her nothing. And that was where strength was born. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet creaks of the old house, I smiled to myself. The silent lesson was working. Angela was beginning to shed her arrogance, replacing it with something far rarer, humility. But lessons are only as strong as their tests, and soon a test would come that would push her further than she imagined. It came to a head one evening in late spring. The air outside was thick with the scent of rain, but inside our little house the air was thicker still, clogged with dread. The phone rang, its shrill cry slicing through the room. Angela froze where she stood, a dish towel clenched in her hand. She didn't move to answer it. She didn't have to. We both knew who it was. When I picked it up, a clipped voice on the other end began rattling off numbers and threats. Overdue, final warning, legal action pending. I listened politely, thanked them, and hung up. Angela's shoulders slumped as though I had struck her. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "No one important," I said, placing the receiver gently on the cradle, but the look in her eyes told me she knew better. That night, I found her sitting on her bed, knees drawn up to her chest, papers spread across the quilt, bills, contracts, threatening letters, all scattered like vultures around her. She looked up at me, and for the first time since her return, the mask of composure was gone. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I can't do this. I can't fight them. They say I owe money I never even borrowed. They say I signed things I don't remember. And even if I work every hour of my life, it won't be enough. I'll drown." Tears streamed down her face, blotting the ink on the papers. I stood in the doorway, torn between two forces inside me, the mother who wanted to gather her into my arms, and the strategist who knew this was the moment, the crucible, where either a lesson would take root or everything would crumble back to what it was. "Angela," I said quietly, "you're stronger than you think." She laughed bitterly. "Stronger? Look at me, I'm nothing. Edward destroyed everything, and I let him. I sold your house." Her voice cracked. "I sold our house. I betrayed you, Mom, and now I've lost everything." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Yet beneath the ache, I felt something stir, a clarity, sharp and undeniable. She was at the bottom now, the very place she had needed to reach. I walked to the bed, gathered the papers into a neat pile, and set them aside. Then I sat beside her, my hand resting lightly on hers. "Do you know what happens when you hit the bottom, Angela?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "You stop falling," I said, "and that's when you finally learn how to climb." She sobbed into her hands, her whole body trembling. I let her cry, let her release the years of arrogance, entitlement, and blind trust in a man who had only ever seen her as a stepping stone. When her tears slowed, she looked at me with swollen eyes. "What if I can't climb? What if I'm not strong enough?" Then you take it one step at a time, I replied. And if you fall again, you get back up. That's the only way. Her fingers tightened around mine, fragile but desperate. Will you help me? I studied her face, the face I had loved since the moment she was born. I saw the cracks, the fear, the humility she had never shown before. And though my heart longed to say yes without hesitation, I knew the answer had to be different. I will walk beside you, I said, but I will not carry you, not anymore. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. For the first time, she understood. Later that night, when she had finally drifted into exhausted sleep, I returned to my room and opened Robert's envelope once more. The deeds, the bank statements, the letter, silent proof of the power I held. I ran my hand over the papers, my heart heavy with decision. I could end her suffering tomorrow. One phone call, one signature, and every debt would vanish like smoke. She would never need to scrub another floor or tremble at another ringing phone. But if I did, would she truly change? Or would she slip back into the same careless hunger, believing yet again that someone would always rescue her? Robert's warning echoed in my ears. Even love can disguise hunger. I closed the envelope, slid it back into the drawer, and whispered into the dark, "Not yet." Angela had reached her breaking point, but sometimes breaking is what makes something stronger when it's put back together. A week passed after Angela's collapse, and something subtle shifted in her. She no longer begged for rescue, no longer looked to me with the expectation that I would sweep her troubles away. Instead, she rose each morning without complaint, tied her hair back, and went to work. I watched her quietly, measuring her steps, searching for signs. Would she cling to humility or slip back into pride the moment her wounds began to heal? One evening, she returned home, her hands raw from chemicals, her shoulders drooping with fatigue. Yet she smiled faintly as she set a small envelope on the table. "My first real paycheck," she said. "It's not much, but it's honest. I want to help with groceries." I looked at the envelope, at the trembling hand that pushed it toward me. For years, she had only taken, demanded, expected. Now she was offering. My chest tightened. "Keep it," I told her softly. "Buy yourself something warm for the winter." Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. She only nodded, clutching the envelope as though it were gold. That night, after she went to bed, I sat by the fireplace with Robert's envelope in my lap. His words echoed in my memory. Trust no one too quickly. But hadn't she earned a sliver of trust now? The next morning, I made tea and called Angela into the living room. She came hesitantly, wiping her damp hands on a towel. "Sit," I said, my voice calm but firm. She perched on the edge of the chair, eyes wary. "Is something wrong, Mom?" "No," I said, setting the manila envelope on the table between us. "Something is very right, but you need to hear the truth." Her gaze flicked to the envelope, confusion knitting her brow. "What's that?" "Your father's gift," I said. "One I've kept from you until now." Slowly I opened it and spread the documents before her. Deeds, bank statements, certificates, Robert's handwritten note. At first, she only stared, uncomprehending. Then her eyes widened, her lips parting as she scanned the numbers, the signatures, the undeniable proof. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. This is millions, properties, businesses. How? How long have you—" "Since before you were born," I said. "Your father built this quietly, carefully. He wanted to be sure we were safe. After he passed, I kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal it." Her hands trembled as she held the papers. "And all this time, when I thought you had nothing—" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I let you think that because you needed to. Angela, wealth without wisdom is a curse. You had to learn what it meant to work, to struggle, to see life without cushions and illusions. If I had rescued you too soon, you would never have changed." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I betrayed you, Mom. I sold your house. I treated you like you were nothing, and all this time you had everything. Yes, I said quietly, and you had nothing. Not because I wanted to punish you, but because I wanted to save you from yourself. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I don't deserve forgiveness. I reached across the table and touched her wrist. Forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. And I give it because you are my daughter. But what you do with it, that's up to you. She lifted her gaze to mine, her eyes raw and searching. What do you want me to do? I held her stare, letting the silence settle like stone. I want you to live differently, to honor your father's work, not squander it, to rebuild not for pride or comfort, but for purpose. Can you do that? She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Yes, I'll try. I'll do better. Trying isn't enough, I said firmly. You must change. Her tears fell onto the papers, darkening the ink. She clutched Robert's letter to her chest, whispering, I'll change, Dad. I promise. For the first time in years, I believed her. As I gathered the documents back into the envelope, I felt Robert's presence in the room, warm and steady. He had trusted me to guard this secret, and now I had passed it on at last. Not as treasure, but as a test. Angela had been given a second chance. What she did with it would define not only her future, but the legacy Robert and I had built with our bare hands. The days after the revelation moved differently. Slower, heavier, as though the air itself understood that something had shifted between us. Angela no longer walked through the house with the restless steps of someone trapped. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet awareness, as if each room whispered a reminder of what she almost lost. One morning, I found her in the kitchen long before dawn, sitting at the table with Robert's envelope open before her. She had spread the documents out neatly, tracing each line with her finger as though committing them to memory. When she noticed me, she flushed. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. I keep thinking about Dad, about how much he worked, how careful he was, and how careless I've been. Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it too, a seed taking root. You can't change the past, I said gently, pouring her a cup of tea, but you can honor it. She nodded, folding the papers carefully. I want to do that, Mom. I don't want to be the woman who takes and wastes. I want to be someone who builds. True to her word, Angela began to change in small, steady ways. She kept her cleaning job, though she no longer needed to. I have to finish what I started, she explained. I need to prove to myself I can earn an honest living. She started budgeting with precision, each dollar accounted for, each expense weighed. Gone were the impulsive purchases, the hunger for luxury. In their place was a cautious frugality that surprised even me. She reached out to old friends, not for favors, but to apologize. Some forgave her, others turned away, but she accepted both responses with grace. I watched her shoulders straighten as she faced the consequences of her past without flinching. One afternoon, she returned from the library with a stack of books under her arm. Social work, she explained when I raised an eyebrow. I want to learn how to help people who've fallen like I did. Maybe I can volunteer at the shelter in town. Maybe I can be useful. The sincerity in her voice warmed something deep inside me. For years, she had chased status, appearances, money. Now she was chasing meaning. Aurora noticed the difference too. Over tea one evening, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Your daughter looks softer. Not weak, different. Like she's finally found her footing." I smiled faintly. She's finding herself. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you realize what matters. Angela also began spending time at the beach house again. At first, she went alone, scrubbing the porch, patching the worn shutters, tending the overgrown garden. One evening, she asked me to come with her. As we walked through the familiar rooms, dust dancing in the shafts of light, she paused by the old fireplace. "I thought I destroyed this place," she whispered, "but it's still here, just waiting to be cared for." I touched her shoulder gently, like people. She smiled through her tears. The final proof of her transformation came quietly. One morning she set her pay envelope on the table, not with pride, not with expectation, but with simple resolve. "This is for the debts," she said. "I don't care how long it takes. I want to make things right." I looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, and knew Robert would have been proud, not because she had money in her hands, but because she finally understood its weight. That night, as she slept, I stood by her door and whispered into the darkness, "You've begun to climb, Angela, and this time you're climbing on your own." The silent lesson had taken root. My daughter was no longer the woman who had betrayed me for quick riches. She was becoming someone new, someone who could carry our family's legacy with dignity. But there was still one more step to take, one final turning of the wheel before the story could close. Summer came slowly that year, soft and golden, the kind that ripens the air with warmth and memory. Angela and I walked down to the beach house one morning, carrying baskets of tools and paint. The old place stood proud against the shoreline, weathered but unbowed, much like me. Angela paused at the gate, her hand resting on the worn wood. "I used to think of this house as a prize," she admitted, "something to show off, but now I see it was never about the walls or the roof. It was about the life we lived here." I nodded, letting the salty wind brush across my face. "Exactly. A house is just wood and nails. It's what we pour into it that makes it home." Over the weeks, we worked side by side. She scraped old paint while I hammered loose boards. We cleaned windows clouded with salt and laughter until they gleamed again. Each stroke of the brush, each nail driven home, felt like more than repair. It felt like redemption. Neighbors noticed, too. Aurora came by with pies, others with spare lumber or flowers for the garden. Word spread through town that the Brooks women were restoring the old place together. People smiled when they saw us, and for once, Angela didn't shrink from their gazes. She met their eyes, shoulders squared, willing to be seen as she truly was, flawed, humbled, but changing. One evening, after a long day of work, we sat on the porch with lemonade in hand. The sun dipped low, scattering fire across the waves. Angela turned to me, her voice steady. "Mom, I've been thinking. This house shouldn't just be ours. It should mean something more. There are women out there, mothers, daughters, who've been left with nothing, just like I thought you were. What if we opened it to them? A safe place, even just for a little while?" Her words settled in my heart like a benediction. The very daughter who once tried to strip me of everything was now dreaming of giving. I reached over, squeezed her hand. "That would make your father proud." And so, the beach house was reborn. Not as a prize, not as a possession, but as a refuge. We cleared the spare rooms, filled them with beds and quilts. We stocked the kitchen with food, the shelves with books. Women came, tired, frightened, carrying their own betrayals, and they found shelter beneath its roof. Angela worked tirelessly, cooking meals, listening, offering comfort. Sometimes she cried with the women, sometimes she laughed. Each day I saw the arrogance fade further, replaced by a light I had almost forgotten she could carry. As for me, I found peace. I no longer needed to guard Robert's envelope with such ferocity. The wealth he had built now had a purpose beyond survival. It became the foundation for something greater: hope, dignity, second chances. One night, as I locked the front door of the beach house after the last light had been turned off, Angela stood beside me. She looked out at the moonlit waves, her eyes soft but determined. "Mom," she said, "thank you for not rescuing me too soon. If you had, I would still be blind. I needed to fall. I needed to break. And you let me." I touched her cheek, tears rising in my eyes. "You needed to learn. And now you have. That's what matters." She leaned into my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt the little girl I once knew, tucked safely beneath the woman she had become. The house behind us creaked gently in the sea breeze, as though it, too, approved of the transformation. Robert's voice echoed in my memory, steady, wise. Even love can disguise hunger. Yes, but sometimes love can also heal it. And as the waves rolled endlessly against the shore, I knew our story had turned, from betrayal to lesson, from lesson to legacy. The house was still ours, but it was also more. It belonged to every soul who needed it. Angela and I walked back home together, the night air cool and forgiving. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the past lift from my shoulders, not erased, not forgotten, but transformed. We had rebuilt, not just a house, but ourselves.